X-Minds and the Autism Society of Maryland are proud to present tonight's event. My autistic child is being bullied. What can I do? First, I want to quickly mention we are recording this in both English and Spanish, and we'll make the recordings and presentation slides available to you in a few days. For the Spanish speakers in the audience, I want to play a recording to give you instructions for finding the Spanish audio channel.
Para escuchar esta presentación en español, acá clic en la opción de menú Interpretación y seleccione Español.
I know we're all excited about our guests tonight, but before I introduce them, I would like to share a few words about who we are. Partnership for Extraordinary Minds, or X-Minds for short. We are a parent-led nonprofit organization, and this year we celebrate 15 years of serving the autism community in Montgomery County. Our mission is to partner with families, educators, and providers to improve educational outcomes for autistic students. To do this, we host a monthly speaker series like this one tonight. We also provide 5 other monthly free events for different parent discussion groups, and we have 1 monthly in-person playground meetup for families with younger children. Our website, xminds.org, is pretty extensive. We constantly update it and add new content about autism and special education. In fact, our newest webpage includes resources about bullying and autism. Our events associate, Annie Pruitt, will include that link in the chat. We also offer family support in navigating the IEP process, and we offer a free X-Minds team consult to parents so they can ask questions and gather input from a committee of parent advocates who are trained and supervised by a professional educational advocate. Annie will put a link in the chat for those who are interested in that. X-Minds offers many supports. If you could kindly mute yourself, thank you. Check out our website, our calendar of events, and subscribe to our monthly newsletter so you don't miss out. This event would not be possible without X-Minds' partnership with our friends at the Autism Society of Maryland, also known as AWESOME. Tonight, we have Melissa Rosenberg, Executive Director of AWESOME, to share a few words about what they do. Melissa?
Thank you, Melanie. And so nice to be here tonight and to partner once again with our friends at X-Minds on this very important topic, you know, an area of great concern for all of us, and looking forward to tonight's presentation. I'm joined here tonight with Kristen Letnick, who is our resource coordinator in Montgomery County. So the Autism Society of Maryland is part of the Autism Society of America, which is based in Rockville, Maryland, part of a network of 70 affiliates across the country. We have offices and staff currently serving Howard, Montgomery, and Anne Arundel County. We also have a Spanish language resource coordinator and other staff that are available to support. So I hope that you will reach out to us for any needs that you have. And again, always glad to partner with X-Minds, and I'll put our, I'm going to give you Kristen's email and our website in the chat. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Melissa. So tonight's presentation is the second in our spring series on bullying and autism. If you didn't catch the first, we can put a link in the chat to the recording of the first part of our series. But tonight, we are honored to have 2 experts with us, Dr. Christine Waanders, who is a clinical psychologist and a clinical consultant for the Center for Violence Prevention's Bullying and Aggression at the Children's Hospital of Philadelphia. She offers support and consultation to clinicians and providers whose patients are experiencing bullying and aggression. She has worked for 18 years as a psychotherapist with children and families experiencing a range of developmental, emotional, and behavioral issues. Dr. Waanders has published many articles and is one of the few experts who can share insights on the intersection of bullying and autism. Our second speaker tonight is Attorney Ashley VanCleef. Ms. VanCleef started her career as a certified special educator before working for 18 years as a school and state level administrator. Formerly with MCPS as a staff attorney and supervisor of the Resolution and Compliance Unit, she prioritized collaborative solutions to benefit both families and school systems. Now, as the founder of Law for Parents, she works as an education law attorney, and she has experience standing up for the rights of students with disabilities who have faced severe bullying. A reminder to please write your questions in the chat at any time for Dr. Waanders and Ms. VanCleef. We will have a Q&A opportunity at the end of the presentations, but we can take your questions at any time in the chat. And our moderator, our X-Minds Board VP, Sue Keisler, will read them out loud when we get to that break. Or alternatively, you can raise your hand when we get to the Q&A session and she will call on you. Thank you so much to our panel for being here tonight. Dr. Waanders will start us off.
Thank you so much, Melanie. It's really nice to be here. Let me just bring up my presentation. All right. All right, so I was really pleased when X-Minds reached out to me. This, I guess, will be the first time I've spoken to a group that is mainly parents of kids with autism, as opposed to a little bit more of a general audience. And this is exciting for me to delve into this topic a little bit deeper and address some of the challenges that are unique for your families. So today I'm going to review some of the basics about bullying, but I don't want to spend too much time on that. I just want us all to have a common sort of language that we're starting from, and think through some of the challenges that are unique to autistic kids in terms of being bullied and then responding to bullying. We're going to have a nice amount of time for questions at the end, and that would be a good time for you to ask more specific questions if I've, gone too fast or anything like that. And I really wanted to spend a good bit of time thinking through for you clinically, what is the best way for you to respond to your children when they're experiencing, bullying and aggression. So a phrase that we use in some of our programs at CHOP that's helpful, I think, for a lot of kids is to talk about friendship problems versus bullying. So there's a lot of aggression that goes on among kids all the time, and it's not all bullying, right? So kids are aggressive with each other, socially, verbally, physically. And if they're of equal status, then we would just consider that aggression, and we would say maybe you're having a friendship problem and we need to work on that. And we can problem solve that together. But when it's bullying, there is a power differential that we're going to look into a little bit more, and the way that we respond needs to be different. So the widely accepted definition of bullying is intentional mean behavior that is carried out repeatedly by someone with more power than the person that they're targeting. And that power can, the stereotype would be of the larger kid threatening the smaller kid, but that power can also be a social power. It could be intelligence. It could be computer savvy in the case of cyberbullying. So the power difference can take different forms. Why do any of us bully? And I do like to clarify, I don't like the term a bully, like this is someone's whole identity. So I really like to think about it as a verb. We engage in bullying. And why does this happen? It gives kids a sense of control that they may be craving. They may be kind of trying to figure out where they stand socially, and they use this behavior to try to get some more social status. They may be the victims of bullying, either at home from older siblings or other kids at school. And once you've experienced that, you would greatly prefer to be on the other side of it and to be the one in control. So we see a pattern there of some kids who've had it modeled for them engaging in it. It can be an outlet for negative feelings like irritability or anger. And then also we see it more often among kids who are more, the sort of personality term is callous. But basically that just translates to being a little less in tune with others' feelings, a little less empathetic. And that can mean that you don't think through maybe the impact of your actions on the other person. Okay, no, it's not advancing. There we go. Types of aggression, I think, are all familiar to us. We have physical, verbal being face-to-face, social or relational aggression, which is often done behind someone's back or maybe sort of covert or even invisible. And then cyber aggression, which can be some of the other forms, but it's carried out via cyber or electronic means. So a little bit more about relational aggression, because that's the one that people aren't always quite as familiar with. But in that category, we would have spreading rumors, gossip, leaving other kids out if there's an activity. Those are the main ones that I can think of. But it involves manipulating social relationships so that one person is put down or left out, and others are kind of joined more together against them. It can be especially hurtful because unlike a physical incident, there's no distinct beginning and end. It's a little harder for adults to notice it. And because it harms our relationships, which really matter, especially as kids enter their, upper elementary and teen years. So this graphic just shows, the broad range of things that people can be bullied for. Sometimes, contrary to what we might think, kids are bullied for being popular or attractive. Other times they're being bullied for maybe having a disability or just a different language being spoken at home. The whole range of things. Just as a human race, we tend to look for these differences and focus on them. At even greater risk for bullying are kids with autism spectrum disorder, ADHD, and other developmental disorders. Kids who identify as LGBTQ are especially at risk. Immigrants, as I mentioned, kids from religious or racial minorities, and kids who look maybe different than what's expected. Maybe they're heavy, maybe they're too short. So those are some of the things that can cause you to be targeted. So for the kids that we're thinking about tonight, the kids with autism spectrum disorder, it appears that rather than just one in about 25 or 30% of kids experiencing bullying, not 1 in 30%, instead of 30% of all kids experiencing bullying, about 44 to 67% of kids with autism have this experience. And that range is because in different studies, they find different levels of prevalence. And that's based on how we ask the question, how, who the population is that we're looking at. And so the main point here is that it's considerably higher than it is on average. Some of the features that make kids with autism more vulnerable, I think, are some that overlap a little bit with ADHD. So externalizing behaviors, things that make kids more reactive. Maybe they're more emotionally dysregulated, things like that. Hyperactivity or impulsivity that can be seen in either autism or ADHD. Those things can really draw attention to kids and cause them to be picked on sometimes. In addition, we have the more limited social awareness and, less social skill for how to handle these situations. And so when someone starts to pick on them, they may react in a really, strong way, or they may get really overwhelmed and have trouble figuring out how to respond. And these things sometimes are satisfying to a kid who's doing bullying. Also, kids with autism may not have the strong network of friends that would be a protective factor. And, I'll talk a little bit further about wanting there to be positive bystanders around to help us if we're being bullied. Just a quick list of signs that your child is being bullied. And you can see that these are generally the signs of distress in our kids. The signs overlap with signs of anxiety or depression. So if you notice an uptick in some of these things, that would be a time to do some assessment and some questioning. So headaches and stomach aches, more school avoidance or being afraid to get on the bus, declining grades, more withdrawal, and then injuries, people sometimes notice. So when it's time to have that talk, I just want to acknowledge that every single kid is different in how they're going to respond to you. So I have some general guidelines, but you may, feel like your child wouldn't respond so well to these. So let's talk about that at the end during the discussion. But in general, I was suggesting that you start with really open-ended questions because you want to do as little leading as possible. But if that's not getting you anywhere, right? So if you say, did someone do something to hurt you or to be mean to you, and that's not getting you anywhere, you might offer a little bit more multiple choice kinds of questions. Did somebody leave you out of an activity today? Did somebody make fun of you? Just gathering some of the facts is really important, and in a really calm way. We don't want to alarm them. We don't want to add to their stress. We want to just stay calm. We want to let them know as soon as possible that they're not in trouble, right? So sometimes they may be confused about that, or they may, just be thinking that this was mutual, even though that it really wasn't because of the power difference. So just letting them know they're not in trouble, and that anybody who is purposely being mean is the one who's in the wrong, and that they deserve to feel safe at school. And that's why you want to try to help them to figure out this situation and make some of this behavior stop. It's important to assess the impact. Some kids are actually less upset about the bullying than the parents are. So I think that's important to consider when you're figuring out your response, that you make sure that it's proportional to what the child is going through, and that you kind of keep your own feelings in check as best you can. But a lot of kids will be feeling very emotional about it, and also feeling embarrassed about it. So we want to, acknowledge that they're going to have a lot of feelings, and we want to move slowly as we figure out what to do. You also want to be assessing for sadness, depression, hopelessness, those things that might lead to greater risk and greater distress. So if you're seeing depression, that would be a clear sign to get some help from the teachers, from the counselors, or from an outside therapist. And I think when a kid has been bullied and had their power taken away from them, it's really important to empower them in the responding. So you want to ask, what would make you feel better today? And as we figure this out, what would feel good? Letting them know you're not going to just, quickly call the school, that you're willing to take a few hours, even take a few days to figure out what you're going to do. And work together as a team with your child. This obviously depends on their developmental level. It depends on whether they speak and can participate in, developing a response. I'm going to talk a little bit about role playing and things like that. So some of that would look different based on your child's, situation. I think it's also important to consider the actual danger. So we have schools in Philadelphia where we really try to work with the family to figure out, is it safe for the child to stay in that school? Can we actually come up with a response and know that it will lead to greater safety, or are the adults having trouble keeping any of the kids safe? So, sometimes you would think like, oh, we have to take action, but I would actually encourage you to try to really assess how safe is it to take action. So these are just some other questions you can consider. I'm going to encourage you to do some brainstorming with your child, and that's a way of building their problem-solving skills and, encouraging them to consider a range of options when they may not naturally have thought they had any options or choices. Talk with them about choosing a response that fits their personality and their skill set. They may prefer a quiet or a silent response. I suggested like rolling eyes and walking away. If they're more confident and bold, they may want to practice some sort of assertive statements that they could make. If they're able to be funny and make fun of themselves or the situation, that really takes back some of the power. And did they have a good friend nearby when these things tend to happen? Or could they bring a friend with them through, let's say there's a certain hallway that is a constant trouble spot, problem solving with the school about that and having a friend with them. So in some of our interventions at CHOP, we walk kids through a problem solving technique, and it really is just brainstorming. We have them generate a number of choices that they could make in a situation where there's been aggression. And that's because some kids just have a more narrow repertoire and they just respond to aggression with aggression. And we need to broaden that repertoire. And so I thought applying that problem solving technique in this situation would really be good as well. Again, it's going to depend on your child's, their ability to be creative, but you're there to scaffold, some of that for them. So you would let them know this is a time to turn off that mental critic that says, no, that's not going to work. That's not going to work. That's not going to work. You know how they shoot us down. You have to ask them to please take a little break and put that critic to the side while we just form a really broad list. Doesn't mean that we're committing to doing all these things. We're just considering all of our options. And then as you put some things down on the list, you want to insert some humor if you can, and also push them to put some more extreme choices. For example, what would happen if you shouted at the bully? That may not be something you want to encourage them to do or that they would naturally do, but just talk it through, consider it. It can be part of the range of things that you talk about. Here are just a couple examples. If they're really feeling unsafe, creating a commotion. Sometimes bullies are saying something really quietly and the teacher isn't noticing. If the kid would say, "What are you saying?" or "What are you doing?" in a really loud voice, that kind of takes away some of the bully's power and draws the teacher's attention. I put in there singing and dancing as a way to get the child laughing a little bit in your conversation. Some kids just want to walk away and leave it at that. Some may want to go get an adult's help or support. Again, confronting isn't often what we recommend, but you're going to consider it in your brainstorming. And then even just thinking, what could you do later? Maybe you can't do it right now because you're too emotional, but maybe a little bit later you could share with your friends what happened so that they can support you. What if your child wants to do nothing? And this happens, right? Sometimes they just want to lay low and they want to avoid the whole situation. I think it's especially important with teenagers that we honor their opinions and preferences, but even with younger kids, if you want to have them, trust you with this kind of information, it's important that you, go slowly through this process with them and listen to what they prefer. Talk about the pros and cons of doing nothing. It may feel better not to make a big deal out of it. You may think you can just sort of lay low and this will blow over. That may or may not be true, right? So you might say to them, I'm willing to try that this time, but we need to talk again if this is continuing, because oftentimes if we don't do anything, the bully will continue. Are there any, if you're really concerned about doing nothing, and you want to call the school without your child's knowledge, you would really need to have some people at school that you could trust, that wouldn't make this a bigger situation, wouldn't create embarrassment, those kinds of things. So think about your team. As I was saying earlier, consider the potential for retaliation, because I think that really is an important part of the decision of how you respond. And then everybody has to take into account their own child's social judgment, right? So some kids see bullying everywhere. And part of what you can do is help them understand the difference between teasing, mean teasing, by a kid who's kind of at their same social status. And it's annoying, but we can do things about it. You don't feel as powerless when you're dealing with that versus actual bullying. So how can we reduce the impact of some of these experiences for our kids? And because it feels so intimidating and stressful to try to deal with these situations, I really like to just remind everybody that your instinct to comfort and support is the number one, I think, biggest thing you can do for your child. So, doing things that just feel good, that can get their mind off of what happened, reminding them it's not their fault that this happened, this shouldn't have happened. And then when they're ready, starting to talk about this as more of a social problem, almost a problem that happens at all schools, and figuring out if they want to do something about it and help other kids. So moving from feeling like a real victim of something to this is something I'm going to be active about can be a really healing process. Finding ways to laugh about it can be helpful. Finding positive meaning in the trauma. So these are just things for you to remember that no matter what other steps you take, I think these relational kinds of things that you do at home can really help kids. So this slide is more about building this kind of rapport with your kids ahead of time, so that when something bad happens, hopefully they are open to talking with you. And that means trying to bring up school regularly. So I know a lot of times kids don't want to say a whole lot. They don't want to tell us a whole lot about their day. And so one suggestion I have is to tell them stories of your own time at school, both funny stories and good stories, as well as maybe some hard things you went through, and just see what they respond with. See if they share something maybe that they went through. And using declarative language, that's an approach that I've been exploring a little bit recently. So rather than directly going into the question at hand or talking about, it comes more from the idea of I'm making a request, but maybe I can do it in a way that makes you less resistant to it. The same thing can happen in conversation, because our questions can be like a demand on the kid. So a couple examples of maybe using declarative language in this situation would be to say, being with other kids can be fun, but I know it's tiring too. And just kind of letting that statement sit out there, see what they say. Or I bet there are some kids at your school who aren't that nice, or they're not always nice. See what that maybe brings about. So it's just that idea that rather than making everything a question, we can mix up our language and see if we get a different response. I said this earlier, but I think it's important not to be too reactive. So you have to get your own emotions in check, even if it means not having the conversation right then. So let's say you found out that something bad happened. I would try to process that, talk with, a trusted friend or a partner, try to calm down about the whole thing. And then once you're ready, talk about it with your child so that your emotion isn't going to add stress to the situation. Sometimes they misread our concern for being angry at them or disapproving. So that's one of the reasons this part's important, I think. And as much as possible, you want to validate their good choices and instincts. You can name this as a problem that happens to many, many people, and that there are good ways to respond to it. And just be careful not to shut down the communication or drive anything underground. So for example, if something happened while they were playing video games online, they might be afraid to tell you because they think they'll lose their access, right, to their video games. So we want to just be, even if we're upset on the inside, try to be mellow on the outside. I think it's important to note that the best, most empirically based ways of preventing and reducing bullying are whole school programs. And so, you know, we're here talking about what can you do as an individual family. But if you have the wherewithal, the best thing to do is ask the school what kind of anti-bullying program are they doing. And just letting them know that you've learned that that's the best way to work on this, not child by child by child, but rather what are we doing to change the climate of our school and create, you know, more positive bystanders among the kids. If anybody's interested, I have the names of some programs that you could look into. All right. So just one second. Okay. So preventing bullying for your own child. Sometimes you're just not going to be able to, so I want to put that out there. But you know, these were just the ideas that I came up with that I think are things that you have control over and can work on, and that will help. So, you know, as you're probably already doing, fostering those friendships with kids at school and staying in close touch with the team at school to see what are they doing to really integrate your child in the classroom. If your child is mainstreamed, they're at greater risk for bullying. If they're in more of a pull-out classroom where they're sort of buffered from some of, you know, from that larger population, interestingly, they may be safer from bullying. But if they're going to be mainstreamed, you want to know that the team is really working to make that a meaningful inclusion experience. And so that's what led to these examples on the second half of the slide. Talking with the teacher to find out how do they build acceptance of neurodiversity in the classroom? How do they foster meaningful relationships with your child? And then I think Ms. VanCleef is probably going to talk about the IEP, so I'm not going to spend too much time on that, but we can actually build some bullying goals and bullying prevention goals into the IEP. But in general, if you can role play hard situations at home and practice even some phrases, you can write down some phrases if they want some, you know, to try to memorize them when they're calm so that when something upsetting happens, they've already figured out what they're going to say. And that's another good time to use humor, right? Just to help them relax a little bit and go back and forth, maybe, you know, take turns, you being the bully and what are they going to say and do, and then flip it around and, you know, let them be the bully and show them some different ways that you might respond. I think too, educating kids about what a good friendship feels like and looks like is another good way to prevent some of these problems. So when kids are, you know, not clear on that, they may put up with behavior that's really not respectful. So you want to be working with them over time to understand some of the things that happen in a real friendship that's mutual. Now, does every kid have these kinds of really satisfying friendships? No. But these are what we're working towards. These are what we're looking for. And I know these are all very abstract things on this list. So I think a good way to talk about it with your child is to make it more concrete. So I just have a few examples here. You know, finding out if the kids are teasing each other a lot in a mean way, and pointing out to your child that, you know, a good friend doesn't really want to hurt your feelings. So maybe you should let them know that, you know, they're going a little too far. They're crossing the line, that kind of thing. And if it's a friendship, then that kid is going to change their behavior because they don't want to hurt your feelings. You know, as I said before, they all have different social skills that they're bringing to the table. But you want to be able to believe that your friend's intentions are good. And you want to have a mutual relationship where you're each interested in the other person, at least a lot of the time. You're interested in what they're talking about. So these are more examples of liking and caring about the other person. And those are kind of self-explanatory, but they're here if you need them. And lastly, just talking with your child about the importance of upstander behavior or positive bystander behavior. So, you know, the reason that they feel kind of powerless and frozen is because nobody should have to handle bullying by themselves. We really do need help to handle it. And that's why, you know, 99% of the time we want them to get help from an adult. But simultaneously, we want them to have some things in their back pocket that help them feel like they know some ways of responding. And so these are just some ways of helping them understand, you know, maybe in their next phase of understanding bullying, they would like to be able to stand up for other friends if possible. Not every kid has the personality to do that, but just to talk about that, or to help them think about who are the positive bystanders in their class who usually do tell kids, hey, stop it, that's mean, that kind of thing. And I included a link to a video here that's just a really lovely range of people talking about being bullied. It's adults and kids who've had bullying experiences, and then they talk at the end about how positive bystanders can help. So that would be a great video to show your kids. I don't think I'll spend time on it with you all tonight, but just wanted you to have it. So that's there too. All right. And that's what I have for right now, but I'm happy to talk more in a little bit.
Thank you so much, Dr. Waanders. I just want to throw it over now to our second speaker of the evening, Ms. Ashley VanCleef.
All right, wonderful. Thank you, everyone. I am going to share my screen in just a minute. As soon as Christine's slides come down, I know she's got some great resources there that I'm sure you'll all be looking forward to checking out. So just as a quick intro, just wanted to put it out there because I am an attorney. Let's make sure this is coming on screen here. All right, there we go. I do need to put my little disclaimer out there that I'm not giving legal advice tonight. We're not establishing an attorney-client relationship, but I am bringing forward some great information that hopefully will be helpful for you all. Having been a school system attorney and now a parents attorney, and then having tried some different bullying cases, I've had a unique opportunity to kind of see it from both sides. So with that being said, and we're not establishing that attorney-client relationship, I wanted to move forward. I was asked to speak about strategies that you can use to successfully coordinate with your school to develop a safety plan. So when we think about a student being bullied, what is that plan that's going to be in place to make sure that they're safe moving forward? How to advocate with your IEP team, and then any other legal actions that you might need to take to keep your child safe or to address any of those impacts of the bullying that have impacted their provision of a free, appropriate public education. So as I refer to FAPE tonight, I am referring to that free, appropriate public education, and we'll get into that more. I also included definitions, and I'm going to skip over that, but just to touch on it lightly, if you look at the definition on the bullying form, and I'm going to keep a lot of my information specific to Montgomery County Public Schools, because I know a lot of our families that are participating tonight are probably a part of Montgomery County, but we do start to see different definitions that float around out there. So we have a Dear Colleague letter that came out from the Office of Special Education Programs, which gave one definition of bullying. On the bullying form that you look at from Montgomery County or within those policies and regulations, you see that in a little bit different form, but ultimately they all come down to the same bullet points that also was shared by Christine earlier. So we see that similarity kind of across the different definitions that are out there that really talks about that power imbalance. So I also listed some additional information here about that behavior that may be verbal or emotional, that really can take different forms. And then the biggest thing that I see in my practice is really the cyberbullying. It's scary what kids can do electronically and can create all of these different profiles and anonymous sites. And, as soon as us adults try to pick up and figure out one, there's a new one that exists, and it's a whole nother piece to try to keep track of. But, I see most of the harm that is happening out there to our kiddos is through that cyber piece. And so I wanted to lift that up. That is another form of bullying that is recognized by Montgomery County's form and most other school system forms. So as we think about what that can be and what that can look like, it can also turn into that harassment piece. And then we look at Section 504 for our regulations from the Office for Civil Rights. And we look to that hostile environment whenever a student is feeling that environment that is just so hostile that they don't want to be part of it, that harassment has been so substantial that they're feeling like it's extremely anxiety provoking as they're going into that, and they feel that surrounding them within the school setting. And so I also wanted to lift that up a little bit. It's the bullying and the harassment that we look at for students, and then which one is falling into what category. So having kind of touched on that briefly, because I know we've covered that before, and everyone can kind of refer back to those pieces, I want to talk more so about what do we do. So as we think about the strategies for a safety plan, our students are in a bullying situation, and they may have been a victim of bullying or even perceived bullying. And I throw that out there because a lot of times it is a situation of perceived bullying. Maybe the pragmatic skills aren't quite what they need to be, and our student may be perceiving something that they are taking in as bullying, but may not actually rise to that level. Doesn't matter. It is whatever their perception is or whatever is actually happening. But I tell parents, you really need to file that bullying report. And as a parent, that's hard to do because you don't want to fill out that form and have that other child get in trouble. And certainly as a parent, you don't want to have another child file a bullying report on your child. So that's always kind of that very difficult first step about kind of what do we do other than the great strategies that Christine talked about. So for me, the filing of the bullying report, because I'm coming at it from the legal lens, is your documentation that can make sure that investigation takes place. So here in Maryland, if you don't file a bullying report, the school system does not have to investigate it. They don't have to report back to you what has happened. And it can just exist out there in cyberspace. So many of my clients that come to me after multiple incidents have said, I sent the school an email. Here's the 10 emails I sent. But if you don't actually put that reporting on the form, they're not required to investigate, and they're not required to come back to you and say what their findings were. So it is a protection for your child, as hard as it is to do, and as hard as it is to hear that your child may have been somebody who had a bullying report filed against them. It is a protection for both. So if the child is actually engaging in some bullying behavior and a report gets filed, then the school system has to look at that, and they also have to do something, which when we talk about doing something, that often means we come back to that 504 or that IEP team, and that means additional supports that address the need, whichever side that's coming from. So after you've filed that bullying report, you get that in, the school system does an investigation, they find whether it was bullying or not, and they report that information back to you. That's when you can say, I feel like we need a safety plan here. We need something in place to make sure that this doesn't happen again. And in Montgomery County, they have a particular form, which I'll show you here in a minute, but it's called a supportive measures plan. That supportive measures plan is a safety plan. And so different places call it different things. Some school systems have done a really great job of putting information out there on what a safety plan is. And other school systems, I'll say, let's write a safety plan. And the principal goes, what's that? So you're going to face different situations depending upon where you are and the level of knowledge of the person that's at that school building. But there is a particular form in Montgomery County. There is a plan that can be put into place. These plans typically have two components, really what's happening during the school day, and then what is it the staff are going to do about that. we can take a look at it on the next page. It might make a little more sense. I'm going to get here and then we'll go back. So as you actually look at the supportive measures plan, you see here first it starts with what are the staff supports? So what are the staff supports that are going to be put in place to make sure that this doesn't happen again for this child? Are they going to be line of sight vision whenever the child's walking through the hallway? Are they going to make sure that there's an escort for the bathroom? Similar to what Christine said earlier with the peer that may be, hey, let me make sure I take a buddy if I go down to the office and I'm dropping off something. And then we look at what are the school supports with, are we changing the lunch seat? Are we making sure that there's an early dismissal from the classroom? Are there the trusted friends that are doing escorts? Are we changing the bus route? So these are all discussions that can be had as part of developing that supportive measures plan or that safety plan. And so the thing to think about whenever you're in a situation where you're discussing a safety plan with the school team is to think about every minute of your child's school day. From the time they leave your house, cross that threshold of your door, until they come back into their home at the night. What is it that they're doing every minute of the day to say, what do we need to do as far as putting safety in place? And that goes back to what did we put on the bullying report? What was it that the other child did and where did they do it? But we know that in a school building, lots can happen. So even if they were bullied in PE and you've got this large unstructured environment, that bully may still have some other interactions with the child just beyond the PE classroom. So we need to look at the entire school day. Some of the considerations that I tell families to think about is whenever we're putting a plan in place, what is the ripple effect? So the bully at this point may be getting stigmatized for having bullied. And so then they're going to rally the troops. They're going to say to all the other kids, look at what they're doing to me. And they're making me be over here in this in-school situation, or they're making me change classes. And then all the other kids want to rally behind them because now something horrible is happening to that child when really they were the one that did something horrible. So we know that oftentimes bullies will be in a situation where they've done something bad, right? And then to try to make it look like they didn't do something so horrible, they will then try to vilify the person that they bullied. So for an example, the case I dealt with most recently, the child that did the bullying that attacked this other child then tried to put all these social media posts together to make it look like the child that had been attacked was a racist. So then no one would like that child. And then it justified her actions. And then that got other people to come along behind her and support her actions for why she had bullied this other child. So whenever that starts to happen, and then there's consequences for the bully, or they're in the safety plan being kept apart from the child they bullied, then that has a ripple effect, because then they're going to say to all of their friends, oh, look, now they're doing this to me, right? They're furthering this. And then that can cause more attention to what happened to your child to actually continue the bullying. And now it's just a ripple bullying instead of the actual incident that took place. So when we're thinking about that safety plan, we want to think about what else could happen whenever we start putting the plan in place and how that could trickle down to our child again and make it even worse. We want to think about the stigmatization. So if I'm leaving class 5 minutes early, everybody knows I'm leaving class 5 minutes early, right? So then is that causing more of an impact to the child that we didn't actually intend to put in place, but we did by our efforts to try to keep them safe? So it's really a balancing act of looking at their entire school day. Where is it that they could potentially have an impact with that bully? What could happen during that impact? And then what could those plans be? Now, what could those plans be? What could the effect of those plans be? So it's certainly important to take a look at. One of the components I always tell families is make a request to view video footage. So as you're thinking about what's happened to your child and what they've described to you, and you're filling out that bullying form, oftentimes in our schools, we have video footage of hallways and entrances and in PE rooms and a number of different, larger classrooms. Here in Maryland, we've tried to pass a bill for several years to get video footage in classrooms of students who are nonverbal and not able to communicate. And unfortunately, we haven't been able to get that passed. But there is a number of different places within a school building that there is video. And there's actually a form in Montgomery County. And so you have the link for that there, where you can request that video footage and be able to go and look at that. You will hear back from them that they may not be able to show it to you, or they have to hide the other children because they do need to protect other children's rights and their confidentiality. But when you see what actually happened, you can share that information with your child's therapist. You can share that information at home to be able to talk through and process what happened. And you can also see what else was going on around them in that environment to help plan for that safety plan and what could have maybe been done a little bit differently. So again, considerations as we're getting into discussions around a safety plan, things to think about. That form is there again. If you do a simple Google search, this form comes up with putting in the name of it, and you'll be able to download that pretty easily. Or you can always ask for the pupil personnel worker, or the principal, or the counselor to provide it to you. It's not one that they're always going to typically give you whenever they're doing a bullying investigation, or that they're going to mention to you. So it's always good to kind of come armed with this information that you can ask for it. So again, think about the entire school day. You may need to ask your teachers for a copy of your child's schedule. Can you give me a copy of their schedule and who they're working with? Oftentimes we go in and we download their schedule from Canvas or whatever application the school system is using, and we say, okay, here's their day. But our students can also have a more robust schedule that the teacher can give you and say, here's the staff that are in this classroom. And if your child has adult support on their IEP, who's doing the adult support? So at lunch and recess, who is the actual adult support that is providing extra supervision for your child? And do we need to add in more of that? So they may have times during the day where we've not included an additional adult. So let's say they're in co-taught classrooms for reading and for English and for math and science and social studies, but they go to health and it's not co-taught and there's not an extra adult in there. Maybe just having an extra adult in that classroom, especially because the sensitive nature of subjects that we get in health as students get older, could help as we look at, what was the bullying that took place and then what are the supports that are needed there. And then also looking at, what are the possible interactions, not only with just the bully, but the child that did the bullying's friends, because that, again, that transcends as students get older, especially with social media and they're, sharing posts of what they've done or said, or, who they've done or said that to. And then their friends get involved and kind of, again, rally behind that. So thinking not only of the student actually did the bullying, but that child's friends and who might get involved, and then where are they during the school day in comparison to your child. So going back to kind of some of the research around bullying, if a child has been a target of bullying, we know that can look at like loneliness and anxiety and low self-worth. There's studies that look at the depression that comes along with that and the low self-esteem. And then a child starts to have that negative attitude towards themselves and then towards school. So it certainly has that impact beyond just what's happened. I had a personal experience. My daughter's 26 now, and she's a juvenile probation officer. And I wonder if some of her experiences with bullying played into that. But, she was bullied whenever she was in 8th and 9th grade. And, she started the cutting behaviors and she's had to miss school because she had to be hospitalized. And that is an impact for that student that, really ties into the anxiety and the self-esteem that then we have to look at as an IEP team. So we want to really think about how this can hurt their perception of school, their participation, and then how that ultimately impacts that provision of a free, appropriate public education. So before we get into kind of that legal piece even further, I do want you to think about when that safety plan is not enough. And I think Christine touched on this a little bit earlier. Can the child continue to stay in the school that they're in? And sometimes that's not the case. Sometimes they really need to potentially be in another school building or another school location because it's really not safe for them to stay where they are. So in many school districts in Maryland, certainly in Montgomery County, we have what's called a change of school school assignment or a COSA request. So parents can put in a COSA request to ask for the child to be reassigned to another school. The situation that this falls under is called an extenuating circumstance. And so if you were filling out this form, you would want to fill out the reasoning as an extenuating circumstance, and you would want to write bullying. Bullying is certainly an extenuating circumstance that involves the physical, mental, or emotional well-being of the student. And parents can provide that information as to, we've been getting treatment for anxiety. We have worked with a safety plan. We are now seeing a therapist. We are, working with a behavior specialist. We're working with our ABA provider. We've tried all of these things and it's still not enough. Or the other piece of that is to save those social media posts. The hearing I did this summer on bullying, we had a stack about this big of just printed out social media posts that really told the story. Oftentimes those Snapchats disappear. I don't understand all the social media, but they disappear, right? So we have to take a picture from another phone to get a picture of some of these things. But the proof, if you can hold on to it in some kind of paper form, would help support a request like a COSA request. Not even necessarily the litigation, but to just show this is an extenuating circumstance where the child can no longer be kept safe in their school building. We know that social media can be wide-reaching. So even if a child is not necessarily safe in their school, the kids are all on social media at all other schools. And so it might be even beyond what we can look at within the public school system. And sometimes we have to go even further, but that would be through that IEP process. But I did want to highlight this as one of the reasons. Under a change of school assignment, in majority of circumstances, there's not going to be transportation that comes with that. So something to think about. Again, as you look at if the child has been bullied, it's impacting their provision of FAPE. They can no longer be safe at their school. There could be an argument to be made that they should be moved and be provided transportation, but that would depend upon the circumstances. So I wanted to highlight on a few of the things that the law actually says about this. So IEP teams should really look at that change of location of services and be very careful about that. As we think about the legal considerations, and I always say this, so as a parent myself, you've got legal advice that an attorney can give you, right? And then you got parent advice. And sometimes they're just not the same. So from a legal perspective, the IEP team should say, no, this is the child that was the victim of bullying. They should not have to move. They shouldn't have to go to another school because of what happened. That's the legal answer. But sometimes that parent side and that parent answer is, there's so much trauma that happened because of the bullying that took place in this school that it's no longer okay for my child to have to go in and face that trauma and those triggers every single day. So taking that into consideration, your IEP team should exercise caution when considering a change of placement because of bullying that took place, but at the same time, that doesn't mean they can't do it. The legal pieces would tell you the student should stay in the original placement until they can no longer receive FAPE in that placement. So when they can no longer receive a free appropriate public education, we should look elsewhere. And then when that no longer is certainly pretty subjective. But if the child's going to school every day, not missing any classes, has no tardies, has all A's, seems emotionally really well during the school day, it's hard to say that they're not receiving FAPE. They're making progress, they're doing well. But when all of that kind of starts to turn and they're not making progress and that emotional well-being is going downhill, then that might be that time to take that consideration. The other consideration that I've listed here is that a principal shouldn't make a unilateral decision. So a principal shouldn't come back and say, well, I'm going to unilaterally take you out of the reading intervention that you're in, and I'm going to just put you back in the general education classroom for reading. And then that way we've removed you from the situation where bullying might be occurring. Or for a child who is actually the one who's doing the bullying behavior, taking them out of a class because of that behavior. Because if that class is something that they need for their services on their IEP, we can't unilaterally change that frequency, duration, intensity. If we have the student leaving 10 minutes early from their reading intervention, and they're supposed to be getting 45 minutes a day of a reading intervention, and now they're leaving 10 minutes early, they're missing 10 minutes 5 days a week, that's 50 minutes. That's unilaterally changing the frequency and the duration of their services. So that's the piece where we want to be very careful if a safety plan is happening outside of an IEP meeting, or if a decision for services is happening outside of an IEP meeting, what that impact to the student could be for that. So again, the legal answer about what we do for our kiddos, and really waiting until there's an impact on that free appropriate public education. And then the parent answer is, if my child is being triggered and it is causing them harm, I'm going to want to move them way before their grades have dropped and they're starting to not make progress in some of their services. So as we think about, again, these legal implications, a school needs to respond, right? So a school needs to do something. If you make a report of bullying and it's a report that you have put in, whether it's actual or perceived, and the school investigates and they find that it's there, and they say, okay, we're gonna put a safety plan in place, and things change and everything's fantastic, right? Then we don't necessarily always need to come back to that IEP or that 504 team. That's not always the case. And so if we are starting to see that self-esteem is impacted, or that child's not wanting to go to school, or anxiety or depression, or any of those components that we've talked about tonight, the school team does need to convene an IEP, and they need, or 504, depending upon what plan the child has, and determine whether that student's needs have changed because of the bullying or the perceived bullying, such that they are no longer receiving a free appropriate public education. So if the child's self-esteem has decreased and they're not feeling good about themselves in their learning environment, maybe they need a safe person to talk to. And maybe we need to add that access to a trusted adult to their supplementary aids and services. Maybe we need to add some goals and objectives to address some of that self-esteem piece and to help them with their emotional well-being. Maybe we need goals and objectives to address anxiety, and then services to provide that either through a counselor or a school psychologist or a social worker. So as the IEP team, we can say, okay, well, how is the bullying or perceived bullying impacting the child? Now, what do we put in place because of that? Any of those adverse changes in a student's academic performance, their emotional well-being, their behavior, all of those effects should be considered by the IEP team, because they will impact whether they're going to make progress. If you see a decline in grades, emotional outbursts, emotional withdrawal, behaviors, any of that rises to an impact and progress, we want to consider as an IEP team. Certainly if a student is missing classes or any of their sessions, those are certainly going to cause an impact. As we look at that as parents, sometimes we don't know because our kids can't communicate with us, or they're not wanting to communicate with us. They're not wanting to tell us what's happening. They just want to, kind of plow through it. But now they're spending a lot of time in the nurse's office. Now they're spending a lot of time in the counseling suite. If it's something that you think is happening and maybe you don't know, you can always ask for copies of the nursing logs. So if a child is going into the nurse's suite, they're logging that time that they're in there. If they're going in to see a counselor, they're typically logging that time that they're coming in there. So sometimes we need to do a little investigation on our own to see where that impact is, because our kids either can't or aren't communicating the possible implications that could be occurring. So whenever we think about the Office for Civil Rights, so throwing some acronyms out there again. So the Office for Civil Rights will find disability-based harassment violations under Section 504 and Title II when a student is being bullied based upon a disability, when the bullying is sufficiently serious to create that hostile environment, when school officials knew or should have known about the bullying and the school does not respond appropriately. So whenever we think about the school does not respond appropriately, we have to put them on notice. And so we have to let them know that the bullying is taking place or the harassment is taking place so that they can do something about that and they can take those action steps to investigate and then put some precautions in place. So I want to talk about some of those legal pieces that can be done whenever we've worked together to file the bullying report and put a safety plan in place, and that hasn't been enough. And when we've worked together as an IEP team to come to the table and say, okay, we're going to take these actions, and hopefully this will really help this child either build some pragmatic skills, give them some coping strategies to deal with anxiety, whatever that is. And we've done that, and that's not enough. That's when we come into possible legal actions. So whenever we think about possible legal actions, we've got two routes that we can go down. For children with an IEP, you can go down the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act. Again, thinking about special education. If you have a 504 plan, you can go down that route of a 504 complaint claiming disability discrimination. You can also go a 504 hearing route. But sometimes it crosses over. So if a child has an IEP, but they're being discriminated against based upon their disability, you can still file a Section 504 disability discrimination complaint. And so this gets really complicated, and I don't want to go too far into the legal ramifications and options here, but I just want you to know that there are options. If that child has an IDEA, if the child has an IEP, they're protected under the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act. And those possible legal actions are a state complaint, mediation, and due process. With a state complaint, if you have, let me give you an example. If you've asked for an IEP team and the school has refused to give you an IEP team meeting, and they've said, we're not going to consider bullying as part of your child's IEP. That's separate. We did our investigation. We're done with that. We're not going to talk about that as an IEP team. That could be a potential state complaint where you've asked for something procedurally and they've refused to provide that to you. Or if you added in some pragmatic supports with a speech language pathologist or a counselor, and then they never provided those, that's a good state complaint. Something was on the IEP that they failed to do. So they'll look back 1 year from the date you filed that, and then in 60 days, they'll issue a letter of findings. They'll tell you as an IEP team, come back and talk about compensatory educational services. So what did we do to right the wrong? Which, doesn't get you extremely far. With mediation and due process, you can go back 2 years. So as we think about 2 years, if a child has on ongoing bullying for quite some time, that might be beyond that 1 year statute of limitations. With mediation, once that's filed, you're at the mediation table within 20 days of the date of that filing. Mediation gives you an opportunity to try to come together and create a collaborative response that says, okay, let's fix this situation. Let's come up with an agreement on how we're going to fix it and how we're going to move forward. That might be something like the change of school assignment and transportation and additional compensatory services of a social skills group that the county is going to pay for. That can take a variety of different forms, and it's just, in my opinion, a quicker process to be able to try to get to some resolution. If you don't resolve it in mediation, you have due process. Due process is more adversarial. A judge actually makes the decision. It does go back 2 years, but judges look at a no harm, no foul analysis. And so they're going to be looking for that stack of proof that I mentioned earlier, something that shows that it happened and then there was harm. So then if you have your child that's being treated by a therapist, if you're showing that they've been in the nurse's suite and they've missed 200 hours of instruction, we're looking for that kind of proof that helps show there was harm, there was something that happened, and then there was harm. There was something that was putting on the IEP that wasn't provided. The child was no longer making progress, and we need to put in some compensatory services to make that right. So there's certainly those legal actions that can be taken. Under Section 504, again, they're looking for a little higher standard under harassment for deliberate indifference. So I made the school system aware, but then they refused to do anything. They just turned a blind eye. Under the disability discrimination piece, if we're asking them to investigate and find that the child was discriminated against based upon their disability, one of the things I found in my practice is you have to indicate on that bullying form that your child was bullied based upon their disability, or they're not going to look at disability discrimination. So, one key takeaway from tonight, if you don't take away anything else, if you feel like your child has been bullied based upon their disability, or even perceived bullied based upon their disability, make sure you check that box on the bullying form. That form is oftentimes submitted online, so you want to keep a copy, whether a screenshot or some other way that you can then send that to the Office for Civil Rights if you were to file a complaint with them for that disability discrimination piece. With that being said, that's a quick overview. I know I'm getting close to my time. Whoops. Let me stop the screen share there. I did include my contact information, but as we think about bullying, the other kind of key takeaway here is it's actual or perceived. And a lot of times our kids, especially with autism, may not be perceiving things accurately, but it's still happening for them and it's still real for them. And we need to address that as part of the IEP team. And if they're the one that is being accused of engaging in that bullying behavior, then we need to address that as the IEP team too, and give them the supports and strategies so that they can have more effective interactions with others. I know we're going to do some Q&A, and I know Christine and I are happy to answer some questions. If they're specifically legal questions, if they can be posed as a hypothetical, I can make sure I'm not giving actual specific legal advice.
Okay, great. Okay, so thank you so much. Gave out a lot of information, and we do have quite a few questions that have come up. I'm going to start off with, you've both addressed the situation where other children are bullying our students. And a number of people have asked, what about the situation where it's not another child who's doing the bullying, but instead it's the principal, or in some cases a teacher who is effectively bullying an autistic child, maybe disregarding IEP accommodations, not using the softer voice they're supposed to be using, or one person specifically says that the principal is told, the principal continuously disregards the IEP because he says it's their school and insists that his voice will not be controlled by an IEP. So what are your thoughts about that when it's not a child that's doing the bullying?
So I'll take that just from the legal perspective. So in Montgomery County and most other school systems, there's a form called complaint from the public. So whenever you have administrative concerns and how a staff member is behaving or how a staff member is acting, you can fill out this complaint from the public form. That's typically supposed to start with the principal. And then if you're not happy with the principal's response, you're supposed to move up to their director. If it's the principal, I would go straight to their director with that complaint and have that discussion about what's happening. And you can work that up through the chain of command within the county. The other piece of that is if they're refusing to file the IEP or follow the IEP, we're back in those legal pieces. So we've got state complaint where they're not following the IEP, mediation and due process. And certainly anytime they're not following what's written on an IEP, that's exactly what the state complaint process looks at. And it's really effective because the state complaint investigator is going to come in and say, okay, show me how you followed this part of the IEP. And if they can't produce any kind of evidence to that effect, then you'll have it in writing that they were failing to follow it. And then the IEP team will have to consider it.
I wanted to add on to that. I think it's absolutely outrageous, right? When you have leaders in the school who are not following the IEP. But I think as parents, we often have that dilemma between calling somebody out for their illegal behavior or, also trying first to see how can I build some rapport with this person if possible. Some people you just can't, but I would try explaining maybe how the loud voice leads to like a fight or flight response. Maybe you can find a video or some reading material for the principal. I think sometimes we just have to resort to the formal processes that Ashley is describing. But knowing that that's just gonna, justice, but it may not help in the short term. I like to think of other practical things that you could try to do to communicate with those leaders too.
Sounds good. Okay, I have a specific question about something that I think that Dr. Waanders said. It says, can you provide a few examples of the positive meaning that can come from trauma? So these are examples that a parent could reference when discussing bullying with their children.
Yeah, I saw that. So I had a minute or two to think about that. But I think what I mean by that is things like, and I think you don't necessarily bring that up immediately after the bullying has happened. This is the kind of thing that maybe emerges over time, that you see some positives developing, but it would be things like, you know, now you can understand other people's experiences of suffering and help them, you know, be more likely to reach out and help them. Or, you know, as Ashley mentioned, it might have even led to her daughter's career path, which is amazing. It helps you learn who your friends are and know who's going to support you when times are rough. And then one more example I thought about is just, you know, helping them to maybe help your child to look at what strengths did you find out that you have through this process. So those are just some examples that I was thinking of.
Yeah, that clears it up. Okay, here's a fairly specific question for Ms. VanCleef from someone who lives in California. Are the public schools required to count bullying incidents or complaints that go to the district? And do they ever have to provide reporting on that kind of data? So can we find out which schools have a lot of bullying incidents?
Yeah, so I don't know about California. In Maryland, it does get reported to the state. And so I would assume then in other states that it's also reported, and then we look at some federal numbers. I haven't pulled a federal report. I know that I was looking at restraint and seclusion from a federal level, but I don't think that I've seen bullying specifically and being reported on that level. So I don't know. I mean, it's one of those things that I think part of the reason why we hear, you know, a parent will go to an administrator and say, hey, this bullying has happened. And like, oh, okay, we'll look into that. We'll take care of it. And they're not necessarily saying, here, fill out this form, because the form is part of the reporting that goes to the state. And so, you know, just human nature, they may not want that number, right, associated with their school and their leadership, because very much so bullying can be part of the culture of a building. And if we have a stronger culture that is more sensitive to others, and we're going to oftentimes see less of that bullying. I mean, granted, there's just things that happen, but an administrator is not necessarily going to want that. But I'm not sure about California. I'm sorry, I don't know the answer to that.
She wasn't actually asking about California. She says,
Oh.
because she's in California, she's not familiar with Maryland, and so she was asking. So it sounds like there are requirements that schools report to the state. And is that data then available to the public?
It is, absolutely. I'd be happy to share a link to that.
Okay, thanks. Okay, a couple of people asked about school-wide anti-bullying programs, and I just wanted to say that we put in the chat a link to the anti-bullying resource that XMind has put together, and so you can follow that to find our resource on the XMind's website. Let's see. Okay, here, this is, I thought, interesting. A special educator has written in saying that students sometimes fill out bullying reports on other students as a means of bullying them through the school system. Is that something you've encountered, and how would you handle that? At least that's how I'm understanding this question. If I'm misunderstanding that, the person that asked it could unmute and explain. Okay, so maybe let's assume that that is the correct understanding of that question.
So I'm not sure I completely understood. Can you say it one more time? I was looking for it in the chat to see if I could understand better, if I could read it.
Okay, so I think what it is that students will sometimes complete a bullying report form about another student who is not actually bullied. but it's a way of harassing or bullying that student by sort of accusing them of bullying and reporting it when it hasn't happened.
Yeah, I actually saw that in the case I was referencing earlier. The child who was being bullied completed forms and turned them in, and so then the actual child who was doing the bullying started filling out forms. You know, it's amazing the lengths that some kids will go to. The child that was doing the bullying in this situation actually called the child's home, harassed the mom and the dad via phone, recorded it, took that recording to school, you know, turned it in as part of her bullying report. I mean, with social media and the things that kids can do with splicing and dicing recordings, absolutely, I've seen it happen. And that's really where, you know, we do want to make sure that the bullying reporting process is happening, because if you're reporting it, they're investigating it. If they're investigating, we can get to the bottom of the fact that this may just be another way to further bully the child. But if you haven't completed the forms that your child was being bullied ahead of time, and now this child's filing that, then we, you know, we don't necessarily have that documentation to say that this is just furthering the bullying that's been taking place.
Okay. So it all starts with that form. There is a question from someone asking about the Fairfax public school system. I don't know if you're familiar with it, but they ask whether these same forms, like the bullying report form, the supportive measures form, and the form to request video footage, do you happen to know, I know you're a Maryland attorney, but do you know if in Fairfax County such forms exist?
The bullying form definitely does exist. I don't believe they have the version of a safety plan. I have asked for safety plans in Fairfax County before, and I've gotten mixed responses depending upon the administrator, but they do have the bullying reporting form.
One person asked, okay, there's a couple different questions about children being moved to a different school because of the dangers of being bullied in their existing placement. If a child sustains injuries from bullying and is in so much danger that he's moved to a different school, one parent asks, what legal actions can a parent take?
Sure. So I've certainly seen this in a number of different cases. If the child is being moved by the school system to a more restrictive setting in order to keep them safe, that kind of goes back to that discussion we were having earlier of should they be put in a more restrictive setting just to keep them safe? Maybe, maybe not. But if now the child has such a high level of anxiety that they need a smaller setting, a more therapeutic setting, certainly that could be something that the IEP team takes into consideration and does. For parents who are at odds with the school system in regards to what their child needs because of bullying, this is where we were saying it does go back to an IEP team. So you take it back to the IEP team. My child has been bullied. There's an impact on their receipt of their free appropriate public education. And maybe the parent is asking for a more therapeutic setting or a smaller setting because of that bullying. So maybe somewhere else on the continuum of placements. So if the IEP team is considering that parent's request, maybe for a private separate day school or a non-public special education school because of the bullying that's taken place, that is something the IEP team has to consider. And we look to what is the data, what tells us that that's what the child needs. What are the goals and objectives that are required in that setting? What have we put in small staff to student ratio? You know, what is it that's driving that kind of a placement? And if the school system says, no, they don't agree to that, that's when parents can utilize those mediation due process type procedural safeguards to try to then get a judge to agree that that is what the child needs. And it can be because of bullying. I mean, the bullying can take such drastic impact on a student that they need a smaller, more restrictive setting in order to address the impact.
Okay. And that could be because the trauma has caused them to have school avoidance, even if they're doing academically doing fine.
Yeah. Attendance is something we have to consider as an IEP team. So if a child is not attending, it's really hard to make progress, especially when we look at grades and we dig down deep into those. So many times a student can have so many grades that were excused that it's hard to say were they really mastering the curriculum or they were just having their grades excused, which gave them that positive grade.
Here's a question that's been translated from Spanish. If your child is hit to the point of needing to be taken to the emergency room, what can you do? What are the steps? And this, and they may be asking sort of beyond with respect to the school.
Yeah, so there's obviously some mental health pieces that are going to come into place if a child's been attacked to that degree. So this is where we start to look at, did we file the bullying report? Did the school system take action? Did they turn a blind eye, or were they deliberately indifferent to what happened? Did they have a safety plan in place that they didn't follow? There's so many questions that come to my mind whenever I hear something like that's happened where a child has been assaulted. If school staff were negligent and they were not keeping a child safe and they knew that there was a potential harm there for that child, then there might be a personal injury lawsuit that family could file based upon those injuries that have been sustained. It's, again, let's ask for the video. Let's get more information, and then that case can be analyzed as to whether now, is it going to be something the IEP team needs to address because the trauma that's taken place, or is it a personal injury lawsuit that needs to be addressed through another type of court?
Ashley, could they file a police report in that case?
Absolutely. So that's a great add-on, Christine. I appreciate you saying that. So that is an assault. Oftentimes we have school resource officers who are going to share that information with the family after that has taken place, that they can press charges. Families can go down, even if, a police officer is not there and doing the charges, you can go down to the clerk's office for the county that you're in, and you can press charges against that child. They're going to ask you for that child's name. And if you don't know it, it makes it really hard to be able to do that. I also have families that seek protective orders. So we can do a protective order, and if that child is in the same school and there's a protective order that's issued, you can bring that back to the school, and then the school has to make sure that the children are kept separate. Again, that can have ripple effects, as we're trying to keep them separated, and then that bully is, kind of getting people to come to their cause, and they're being ostracized, or they're being, put in an in-school suspension, and then they get everybody to rally around them. But there are absolutely, legal pieces that can be put in place besides just what a school system would do if it does rise to a criminal charge that can be placed against that child, or even just that protective order.
I wanted to mention one other possible resource. Some hospitals have violence intervention programs. And I know we have this at CHOP. I think they have it in Baltimore, and I don't know about the hospitals closer to you all, but when a child comes to the ER and they've been assaulted, they can be referred to this team that then helps the family with case management and other services, trying to bring an end to this violence and also support the child and prevent trauma. So if you wind up at the ER, I would, ask what supports does the hospital offer to kids who've been assaulted.
Yeah, I would add on to that too, and I'm so glad you brought that up. We can ask for there to be a restorative conversation. We can ask that, the schools to kind of trying to bring those kids back together and try to mend those fences. But if it's been so traumatizing, that can just cause more harm. So we want to keep, that balance there of what is it we're going to ask for, and then are we going to do more harm by it or not? So in the school system, we're always thinking of like restorative justice, and how do we get everybody back to a situation where we can exist and move forward. But sometimes that's not always in the child's favor. We had a teacher who had bullied a child in a situation I dealt with, and we did bring in the staff facilitator from central office to do a restorative conversation between that staff member and that child, and that actually turned out really well. But that's a very different situation than a child and a child.
We are running out of time. I just have one more question I think we have time for. Is it proper to call the parent of the child who's bullying my child? And if so, what should you say?
I'm going to give the legal answer on that and say it depends. Depends on an awful lot. But Christine, you probably want to take a little different approach.
I actually, we usually don't recommend that you call the other parent. I think sometimes we think, of course, that parent is going to understand and they need to speak to their child, but many, many times that is not the case. And you can really then create a new conflict between you and the other parent. And yeah, so I find that sometimes that really goes awry, and it's best to keep the communication through someone at the school.
Okay. Well, we have many, many more questions, but we have run out of time. So if either of you are willing to take any questions by email.
Sure. Yeah, and we'll be sharing our slides, so please
Okay.
feel free to follow up.
Thank you so much. Melanie?
Yeah, so many questions and such great information. I'm sure we could keep going, but I want to respect people's times. Thank you so much, Dr. Waanders and Ms. VanCleef, for both of your presentations and answering our questions tonight about bullying and autism. I'd like to invite everyone in our audience to complete a short 3-question feedback form. To get to that feedback form, use a link. Annie just put it in the chat. We've recorded this presentation. I think we got many requests about that, and I assure you we have recorded it, and we will email a link to the recording to anyone who's registered for it, but you can also find the recording on our website or on our YouTube channel. I do want to say that next month, our Autism and Bullying series continues, May 14th, with a presentation on cyberbullying by Dr. Chad Rose. The title of that presentation is Virtual Vigilance, Safeguarding Autistic Students from Cyberbullying. And just to give you a little taste of what that's going to be like, Dr. Rose is a bullying expert from the University of Missouri. He's director of the Mizzou Ed Bully Prevention Lab. So please join us on May 14th to keep this discussion going. In May, X-Minds has some fun things going on. We want to invite you all to a comedy club fundraiser on 2 nights, May 3rd and May 4th in Gaithersburg at the Give a Hoot Comedy Club. So get a head start on Cinco de Mayo and enjoy some laughs, Mexican food and margaritas, all while raising money for a good cause. That would be us, X-Minds. And on May 4th, we have a special party for middle and high schoolers with a Star Wars theme. Teens can come out and enjoy an evening filled with lightsaber duels, intergalactic video games, snacks, and pizza. This is being co-sponsored by our friends at Slush and Crust Productions. And here's a suggestion. This event is at Gaithersburg High School, so parents can drop their kids off at the high school and head over to the comedy club to enjoy the Give a Hoot show. You can find out about all these events on our calendar at xminds.org. I do want to say thank you again to the Autism Society of Maryland. And thank you all for joining us tonight. Have a good night.